Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today I have a fun card that uses this alphabet soup set by Hero Arts. It's got all the letters in it so you could spell anything you want. And I'm using my Peerless watercolors. The first thing I'm going to do is stamp my soup bowl and spoon with some VersaFine black onyx ink. And I'm using this because it stays wet for a while. It's a pigment ink and I can sprinkle it with some clear embossing powder and heat it to set it. And this really helps your watercolor because it helps you to stay in the lines. I'm going to stamp most of my larger elements and the letters using my Misty and some VersaFine ink. And then I'm going to go in afterwards with the smaller pieces and sort of fill in the gaps. I've got these kind of leaves here, spices I guess, and then there's a cracker stamp, so I'm going to fill the holes in with the cracker. And then after I was done, I felt like there was a gap. I'm trying to decide here, right underneath the kind of RIS. So I decided to add one more cracker stamp in there. It's nice that you have these little ones that you can fill in the gaps with. And then I'll sprinkle that with some embossing powder and heat it. This is called Incredible White Mask Liquid Frisket. And I have a dedicated brush for this. It's masking fluid. You don't want to shake it, you just want to swirl it around really well, and then I'll kind of mix it up. And I actually had to buy a new jar of this after maybe a few years because it got really sticky. But it's great, it dries quickly, and so what I'm going to do is color in all of these elements with the masking fluid, and that way it's going to be much easier to watercolor my soup when I don't have to worry about working around all of these elements. Now I'm also going to take my brush after I've dried those pieces, just kind of making some swirls, and this is sort of to make it look like I've got some highlights in my soup. So I'm going to do some long lines, some short ones. It's okay if it's not perfect. In fact, I don't want it to be perfect. So I'm not reloading my brush very often because I want there to be kind of some faded areas of masking fluid. And that will kind of add to the look of soup to just be more realistic. All right, so I'm gonna let that dry completely and I'm gonna start with my watercolor. I'm using a lot of different colors in this card, so I'll list all of them in the blog post. So I have 3 colors for my soup because the more colors you add, the more realistic it looks. I'm going to start with this lightest color. It's called Yellow Ochre. And I have a brush that has a very pointy tip because it allows me to kind of get really close to the edges without going over them. So you can see that when I color this in, I'm not making it the same solid color across the whole soup. So I'm making some areas a little bit lighter, some a little bit darker. Now I'm going to take this medium color. This is called Burnt Umber. And I'm mostly going around the edges, so where it would be darker kind of against, you could see the shadow of the bowl against the soup. And I'm also adding a couple of lines in the middle just to make it look like those kind of reflection areas pop out a little bit more, and that'll help with that. And then finally, I'm going to add some of this deep yellow color. The other 2 colors were kind of bland, and this one is a little bit brighter, so I thought it would be a little interesting, but I'm not going to add too much because it is quite different than the other 2. So here is my final look of the soup. You can see the resist of the masking fluid of those swirls that I did. For the top of the spoon, I'm using those same 3 colors. I'm going to drop them in carefully. If I get too much water, I use a tissue to pick it up, and then I just start over. These Peerless watercolors are really easy to use. Next, I'm going to work on the spoon. Sometimes I drop water first before I put the color in, and that's what I'm doing in this case. And I do that when I want the water to do a lot of the work for me. So if I'm okay with things spreading around really quickly, I'll put water down first. If I want to be precise about where the color is, then I won't drop water first. I'll just go directly in with the color to dry paper. All right, I added a little bit more dark area to the bottom and off to the side here just to add a little bit more dimension to the spoon. Now I'm going to work on my bowl. I'm also going to drop water here so that the color will spread quickly. I'm going to start with this butterfly wing blue, and I'm going to color most of the area, but I'm going to leave a white spot kind of at 1 o'clock and 7 o'clock, and that'll sort of be my reflection. So I'm going to try to make it the darkest at 11 o'clock and 5 o'clock. So I'm really focusing on gradually making that color lighter as I get to the edges. So you can see I'm putting a lot of layers on to make it darker. I also added a peacock blue because it's sort of a greenish color, and I thought that that would be nice to have a little variation. For this line sort of inside between the soup and the bowl is sort of the inside of the bowl, and so I'm using those same two colors. I'm just making them much darker so it looks like it's kind of shadowed in on the inside of that bowl. By the way, whenever I switch colors, I am letting the panel dry first. So after I did the inside of the bowl, I decided to make it a little bit darker. So I'm just adding a little bit more of those same two colors. So you'll notice that I add another layer of color if I want something to be darker. It's kind of hard to do a how-to video with watercolor because it's different every time, and there's not really a methodology to it. It's just something that you sort of have to go with, and every time it's going to be a little bit different. All right, so it has dried completely, and so I'm going to take my masking fluid off, and you can see all my elements are white, and I also have those white swirls inside the soup, and I'm going to work on those in a little bit. You can see I dropped a little bit too much color there, and so what I'm going to do is wipe my brush off and use just plain water and try to spread that around. As long as it doesn't dry too much, you should be able to fade it pretty well. You can see I did this quite a few times trying to get this faded because I don't want my pasta kind of to blend in with the same color as the soup. So I'm going to do those two little curly pieces, and then I'm going to color all of the letters. And I definitely want these to be lighter so they stand out a little bit. This kind of coloring is not what I typically do just because it makes me a little bit nervous to have something different every time. I like there to be kind of a methodology to the madness. Anyway, so for my mushroom here, you can see I had to start over. I just want a light color all over because I'm going to go back and add a little bit of darker color to the left side of the mushroom so it looks a little bit more dimensional. For the crackers, I'm just going to quickly color these with burnt umber. And then for this patch of, I'm not sure, maybe it's grease, I don't know what it is, but I'm going to take flesh tint and I'm going to color it all one color at first, and I'm going to go back later to add a little bit more darker color on the left edge, just like with the mushroom. So for the leaves, I'm just doing straight olive green. I'm not really worrying about any sort of shading. I'm just coloring it in. And now I can go back to my mushroom, and you can see now that it's dry, I can add another layer of color, and I'm just going to add it to the left side and a little bit on the top of the mushroom. And then the same thing with this puddle, I don't know what to call it. I'm going to add a little bit more of the flesh tint so you can see it gets darker the second layer. I have these thick swirly lines of bright whites. What I'm going to do is color part of it with the yellow ochre, which is my lightest color, and then I'll bring in that burnt umber as well. And so I'm going to cover some of that white, but I am going to leave some of it plain white so I get a bunch of new colors in here by doing that. All right, I'm going to cut that out with a scissor, and now I'm going to work on my background. I'm going to just grab a bunch of different letters randomly and put them on an acrylic block. I'm using Simon Says Stamp Fog ink, and I'm stamping directly onto my card base. You really can't see the letters that I'm stamping right here, but I'm going to randomly put them all over the card base. And I'm starting kind of working from the middle outward. So you don't want to work toward the middle because then you might end up with a bunch of weird spots in the middle. But I did have some gaps, so I just grabbed one of the letters and used that to fill in the gaps. I wanted my background to have something, but I didn't want it to be bright. I wanted it to be very subtle. So this just fades into the background. I have this double-sided foam adhesive by Decofoil, and I thought it would be a great way to sort of unwarp and flatten out my soup bowl. It's pretty stiff and it's thin, so when I bought it, I thought it was a big piece of foam, but it's actually very thin. But I thought this would be a good use for it. So I'm going to take a circle that fits my soup and run it through the Big Shot with my double-sided adhesive foam, and I'm going to put it on the back of my soup. And then later on I'll adhere this. You can see how flat it makes my watercolor panel. This is 90-pound Strathmore watercolor paper, by the way. I really love the sentiments in this Simon Says Stamp Big Greeting 1. I'm going to use the happy birthday because it's right justified, so my soup will be on the left. One thing about these letters though is that they're empty and there are a lot of lines to them, and I thought it was a little too distracting for my design because I have all those lines in the background with those empty letters, so I filled in the gaps with a Micron 03 pen. So I'm going to peel off the other side of this adhesive, and I'm going to put this right here above the happy birthday and to the left. And then for my spoon, I'm just going to add some two-way glue and put it right there like it's laying on top of the bowl. And that is my card for today. So a little hard to explain. I hope you enjoyed the watercolor. It's a little different. I don't normally do this sort of watercolor, but it was fun. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.